Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the modeling lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers and the modeling industry. The modeling lifestyle is sponsored by NGMC, who believes that through bringing hobbyists together with both information and modeling, the hobby will grow stronger with more model builders than ever. NGMC, which started as Narrow-Gauge Modeling Company, is focused in 1/4 inch scale across hobbies. NGMC is a market leader in 1/4 inch scale with a range of products from over 50 vendors. In 2021, NGMC became the largest reseller of out-of-production model paint in North America with over 9,000 bottles in stock. And now to Jim Kellow, MMR, host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really do appreciate it. Hope you'll come back often and tell your friends about our shows. Modeling Lifestyle is not only a show that introduces you to some really great modelers, but people who have made significant contributions to our hobby and have made modeling a major part of their lives. I want to thank so much the viewers on YouTube that are watching us live tonight. Please feel free to use the chat function with any questions or comments you may have. And as soon as I find out about them, we have somebody on YouTube watching the chat for us. I'll be glad to answer the questions of our guest, and he will be glad to answer your questions. As always, we need help for our shows because it's all run by volunteers. So if you think that you have a little time and some help that you can give us, we sure would appreciate knowing about it. My email is jimkellow@newtracksmodeling.com, and I'd love to hear from you because we can use all the help we can get. We also have some out-of-pocket expenses that we have to pay for the shows, and we have a Patreon account, New Tracks Modeling, and if you can see your way clear to make a small contribution to our shows, we would certainly appreciate that. Also, I want to mention our scholarship that we're starting this year. It's a $1,000 scholarship to a young model railroader who's going to continue their education in one of the STEAM programs. That is either a science, technology, engineering, art, or math discipline. And this is the first year we've done it. The money that we raised is all from volunteers. The people that are running the shows are all volunteers. Everything that we get goes into the scholarship. So we really hope that you'll tell the kids about our scholarship. And if they're model railroaders, ask them to apply for it. The more people that apply, the better we like it. And we really do appreciate all the help you can give us by making our scholarship known in the modeling community. We've made it as easy as we can. They can get the application online at newtracksmodeling.com/scholarship. They can submit it online. And if they have any questions, there's no telephone numbers and so forth on that website they can call to get information and help. So if you have a son, daughter, grandchild that might be interested, please let them know about it. Well, with that said, I now want to introduce our guest. This is Bob Brown. Bob is not only one of the most talented, creative, and artistic modelers that I've ever met. He's also been a publisher. He's been the only editor of the premier Narrow-Gauge magazine in the world. And he's been the only editor that Short-Line Gazette, that's the name of the magazine, has ever had. He has been a major force in our hobby for many, many years. He's achieved the MMR status, and he's helped numerous modelers to inspire them to improve their modeling and their knowledge of our hobby. So Bob, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jim, for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, Bob, let's start back. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, let me start by saying I turned 90 last January, which amazes me. So I'm probably the oldest person you've interviewed. And
You are.
I'll be talking about my background in the hobby shortly, but I can name right exactly when I got into the hobby. I've been in the hobby for 79 years. So that's quite a long time, I think. But I was born and bred in California, lived in the Central Valley, Modesto, Stockton, Sacramento. And in 1946, my family moved to Palo Alto, which is, of course, where Stanford University is located. And in the, used to be called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. It was a big fruit growing valley. It's now called the Silicon Valley, and they grow chips now here. I'll be talking to you about my background shortly, but 1955 was a big year for me because I graduated from San Jose State along with my wife. We were both biology students. We were in a fish lab, and she came in, and she was an A+ student, and I was a C student. And when she sat down across from me, that made her my partner. And it's kind of scared me to have a straight A student as my partner. But we got along well, and we started dating, and I proposed to her. And so we graduated on a Friday and married the next day on the Saturday. And we only had $150 between us, but we had jobs. And we took a 2-day honeymoon to Lake Tahoe. And on the way back, we stopped at the Diamond and Caldor Logging Railroad, where I took photographs, which probably got Irene wondering what she got herself in for. And then we started our jobs and worked. And 6 months after we started our jobs, I got drafted. Back in those days, you had to face the draft. So I spent 2 years in the service while Irene continued to work to help pay off some family bills we had. But while I was in the service, I built O-scale traction and managed to build a Sacramento Northern interurban car in O-scale. But I shifted to TT scale for a while because I could get everything into a cigar box and carry it around with me. After I got out of the service, I went back to San Jose State and got my teaching credential, and then started a 35-year career teaching 5th and 6th graders in Palo Alto. And Irene went on to get her master's degree and her PhD at Stanford. So we became known as Mr. and Dr. Brown. And it started Fine Lines in 1964 and the Gazette in 1975. And to retire at age 60 to work on the magazine full time. So this meant that I had produced a magazine with a lot of help every 2 months for almost 50 years, almost 60 years now.
Yeah.
So I'll come back to how I moved along in the hobby a little later in the interview.
Well, but why did you pick model railroading of all the hobbies that you could have gone into? What drew you to model railroading? Well,
I can get right down to the month that I got into it. When I was 11, I went into a magazine store in Modesto, magazine shop. They polished your shoes and sold smokes and things. And I looked down, I was looking for a model airplane magazine. I looked down on the bottom shelf, and there was a little magazine with a hand holding a Victorian signal cabin. And that caught my eye. That was the October 1944 Model Railroader. And I bought it and I couldn't put it down. And in the magazine, there was a gallery of pictures from Jack Alexander's ON3 Timber Ridge Logging Company. I knew nothing about narrow gauge. I knew nothing about O-gauge. I knew nothing about anything. But that I wanted to build models like that. And little did I know that 50, 60 years later, I would own some of those models. Christmas that was October 44, I haunted that magazine's stand and got one more magazine in early 45. And then I got a third magazine in December of 45, right after the war had ended. But there were no train sets, so I had no chance to get a train set. So at Christmas, my parents gave me a wristwatch, which was a pretty good present. And as we were opening our gifts Christmas Eve, my mom said, "What's that noise on the porch, Bobby? Would you go check the porch?" So I went out and I opened the door, and there were 3 boxes of old tin plate trains sitting on the porch. My father had found them in an ad in the newspaper. And the top one had American Flyer on it. I opened it up, and there was an electric outline 444 with some passenger cars. And one of the passenger cars had a hook on it, so you could run it around, and they had little metal mail bags, and you hook the mail bags and pop them into the mail compartment of the passenger car. And then second box had a whole bunch of freight cars, no caboose, and it had a depot and a bunch of signs. And the third box had a whole bunch of track and 5 turnouts, which was wonderful. And it had a power pack that was taped together, and every time you touched it, it gave you a 110-volt shock. So that was my train set, and I still have it, and it's the most wonderful gift my parents ever gave me. I was able to set it up one time, and then we moved to Palo Alto and in early 46. And then I got into scale trains. So I never set it up again, but I still have it. It's still in my closet, and I still cherish it. It was a wonderful gift.
Oh, I bet. We can always remember that first, it's almost like the first love. It's that first time that you saw that model train.
You're right. Then when we settled down in Modesto and in Palo Alto, about 1948, my parents bought a house, and I had a place to build a scale model railroad. So I bought a sheet of, I worked picking apricots and cutting apricots all summer, got enough money to buy a 4x8 sheet of plywood and enough Atlas track to make a loop and a Varney dockside kit. And I put the kit together, and I never got that Varney dockside to run around one time without derailing. And I was using batteries, and the batteries were burning out. So my parents took pity on me and bought me a Pittman power pack. And then the Varney dockside would still never go around. And so they then, at my first birthday, then bought me a Varney F7 diesel with a spring drive. And I got that to run, even though it ran like a shot out of a slingshot. And then I was able to move out into the garage where I built an HON3 layout in the garage. And we have some pictures of this somewhere along here.
Okay.
And then a little bit, about 1952, I traded all my HO trains in for an oak gauge General Motors 10-wheeler. Oh, here it is. I got some message on my. Okay, here's the picture of my HON3 train.
Yeah.
And if you look at the caboose on the right, and if you look really careful, there's a pigeon on the roof, and it's got pigeon poop. And that's right from John Allen. He was my hero in those days. But you can see the weathering of John's. And does my cursor show here?
No.
No, okay. Look at the end of the train. There's a locomotive pulling it. That's a Lindsay TT dockside that Chemtron once sold with HON3 drivers on it. And I cut the cab off, put a brass cab on it to make it look like a Mishkel number 11. And that's horrible modeling, but that's what I did back in 1949, 1950. And then later I bought a Lobo OCSO. Oh, here's the model railroader for October 44. I don't know why, but that little Victorian signal cabin caught my interest.
It's a beautiful model is why.
Yeah, It was at 1/8 of an inch of the foot.
Yeah.
And then
Beautiful.
later I bought a Loma 060 and really learned to solder. Then I sold all my models in order to court Irene. I had to get money to court Irene, so I sold everything.
Well, you talked a little bit about the scales. So you experimented at one time with TT and HO, HON3,
Yeah,
but you finally settled on ON3.
yeah. I prefer O scale, and I built layouts as you said in HO. I've also done an ON2 layout, and I got a garden railroad outside.
Right.
Over the years, I built a ON2 model of Wiscasset, Maine, based on the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington. And there I had to actually scratch build 2 Forneys because there were no commercial ON2 models available then. And then I went on to build my Ptolemy Forks layout. And then later, in 2000, I built an O-scale model of Los Altos, California for the Los Altos History Museum, which is still there and running. And then I did my ON3 layout, which also has ON30. So I've done mostly O-scale. It's just a size I like to work with. And I think I've done a lot of modeling. I'm still working on my Ptolemy Forks layout upstairs as I talk.
Well, I think we've got a couple of photos that we can show of different.
Now this goes back to that first model railroader. There was this page of a gallery of photographs from Pioneer ON3 modeler Jack Alexander. And I don't know why, I didn't know anything about any of this, but I now have several of those models in my collection. And I don't know whether this was something in my DNV or something about DNA, about modeling in narrow gauge, but I certainly love the models on this page.
They're gorgeous. They really are.
Now this is a shot of the red light district on my Ptolemy Forks layout. And it shows why I like O scale. It's a perfect size. Those cribs all have interiors, but we're not showing them because it may offend someone. But if you look in the left-hand crib, there's a young woman pulling up her socks. That shows in O scale. I don't think it would show in HO. So O scale is a nice detail for that. It would be better in large scale, of course, but then you couldn't fit anything in a normal room. So this demonstrates the detail I like to get. Right in the middle, there's a lady paying, or a man paying a lady, and the detail stands out, and that's why I like. And there's a lot more detail commercially available in O scale. So this is why I've stayed with O scale.
It's beautiful modeling, Bob. It really is, and the detail is just exquisite.
Thank you.
Well, what aspect of modular railroading do you enjoy the most? Do you like to run trains? Do you like building? What aspect of it do you enjoy?
I like to build. I'm not an operator, and it may be because of that damn Barney Dockside. I don't know from so long ago, but things just don't seem to work for me. But I like to build them, and I don't enjoy maintenance and gears and DCC and all that, even though I have it. I prefer building highly detailed scenes, and I love to build interiors with tools in the drawers of the workbenches, things like that. That's what I really love to do.
Well, I think we've got some photos here that show the kind of modeling that you're talking about.
Yeah, this photo shows some unusual pile drivers. There's 3 in a row. I like building unusual logging equipment. And the track in the foreground is N scale, but it represents a park railroad at a hotel on my layout. But it does illustrate the, I call funky kind of modeling I like to do.
Yep.
Now, here's a internal combustion climax locomotive. Again, an unusual logging locomotive. And here are two interesting cars. On the far, well, let's say the one on the right is a kit, is a saw filer's car. They would roll it up into the woods, and the saw filer would sharpen the saws. The middle car is it's based on a prototype on the Michigan California Lumber Company. It was a portable water tank. They would move the car to a donkey engine, fill it up full of water, and use it to put water in the boiler of the donkey engine. The far left car is called a hog car, and it hauled chunks of wood from the sawmill to the donkey engines to be used as fuel. I measured these up on the Mich-Cal and built them, and this is the kind of model I really like to do. And you can see the detail in my sawmill in the background.
Absolutely. And I'm telling you, the modeling is just fantastic. It really is.
Thank you.
Next.
Here's another unusual, I call it a Loki. It's a home-built logging locomotive. It runs on an HO mechanism that I've widened out to ON3. But again, a different kind of a locomotive.
I like the different kind of models that you build.
Yeah. This is a sawmill, of course, but it shows what I call clutter.
Yeah.
I coined the word, I think, clutter. In fact, my friends say when I make a mistake, I put a bucket on it. This is a Jack Work article about 1960 in the MR. Here's an interior view of a donkey repair shed in one of my engine shops. You see the workbench with the power tools on it, all the bits and pieces. I learned to cast Narrow-Bend, so I'm able to cast a lot of my own details, which saves a lot of money.
Absolutely. That's just exquisite. Beautiful.
Here's a saw filer shop where the saw filer, you notice the big long vise where they put the saws, and then that they would file the saws from the tools on the workbench.
Well, I tell you, your modeling is just fantastic. It really is.
Well, thank you.
I look at it and just the imagination that you bring to the hobby shows in the amount of detail that you include in your models. That it's really outstanding, Bob.
Thank you.
How did you? So you enjoy modeling. So how did you transition then into being the publisher and an editor? How did you get involved in the print magazine business?
Well, we got to go back a ways on that. About 1959-60, I met a fellow named Lee Kloss, and he had been writing articles in the Model Craftsman, and he was local, so I made an effort to meet him. And he was building an ON3 Southern Pacific narrow-gauge boxcar using prototype blueprints and trying to build it perfectly. He cut his own wood. He made Narrow-Bend castings for the hardware. He made his own side frames for the trucks. He made everything himself. And then he put some ON3 wheels in the trucks. And when he went to put them up in the sills of the car, they wouldn't fit because they were so oversized. So then he sat down and he machined some scale wheels that would fit. And he realized that the scale wheels that looked so much better worked. They stayed on the track. Everybody said they wouldn't work. So he was working with Cliff Grant on them, and they devised a set of scale ON3 wheels that they called 1/4 inch AAR. And they started producing them and selling them commercially. But when they ran the 3-foot wheels over dual O-gauge track, they would fall into the flangeways. So then they had to make standard gauge wheels, and they decided to move them in to the correct 4 feet, 8 1/2 inch gauge. And I got fascinated by this idea. And so I thought, well, if we had a magazine that featured fine scale modeling, maybe we get more people into the hobby. And if we got more people, we get more manufacturers. We got more manufacturers, we'd have more parts, and I would have more parts to use in my models. So I was taking a newsletter then called Trolley Talk from Richard Wagner. And I thought I would make a similar little newsletter, and I called it Fine Lines.
Yeah.
And in the first one, I typed it on a Ditto Master. Now, if you are a certain age, you remember the purple Ditto Masters you had in school. They smelled sweet. You liked them. And I went down and ran off 90 copies, stapled them, and mailed them out using Lee's Valley Car Works mailing list. And then Lee financed the second issue, which was printed and was used as an advertising venue for his Valley Car Works. Then I took over the third one, which was printed, and then the fourth one, and pretty soon I was producing a magazine. And this is a typical Fine Lines on the right side here. I said in this first one, this is the first, probably the last issue, if you read that. But 9 years later, I merged it into the Gazette. And I said, send me $1 and I'll promise you 2 more issues. And the people sent me dollars, and I did.
So really, Fine Lines became the Gazette.
Yes. And later, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And
let's see, I think we got one more picture.
yeah, do you have a picture? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, here's the Gazette. Now, I started the Gazette. Fine Lines was, towards the end, published by a model railroader who was a printer and a publisher. His name was Gibbons, Charles Gibbons. And he came to me and he said, I can do a better job for you. And I let him print Fine Lines for me.
Right.
But while Fine Lines was coming out, a new magazine came on the market called Sims Age News. And they were a competition with me. They were better than my magazine, and I wasn't happy. And so but they did go out of business because they were trying to make a profit, which you can't do with a little magazine. Yeah. And so they after 18 issues went out of business, and my printer said he wanted to buy them. So I didn't want my printer printing my competition and myself. So I suggested, let's merge the 2 magazines into a new magazine. So we, Gibbons and I went to Denver and met with the Slim Gauge News people and decided to merge. And I came up with the name Narrow-Gauge Gazette, but then I couldn't include short line and vintage trains. So I changed it to Narrow-Gauge and Short Line Gazette.
Yeah.
And then we established it with Gibbons as a publisher, me as the editor, Jerry Hoffer, who was the Slim Gauge News editor, as the Rocky Mountain editor, and we hired Gordon Cannon of Cannon Scale Models to put the magazine together. And Gordy finally left in about a year to start Cannon Scale Models, making a line of HO detail diesel parts. And then a little later, I got a phone call saying we were 5,000 in the hole, and I sent Irene in to check out where we were with a computer, little Hewlett-Packard computer, and found out we were losing serious money. So Irene and I bought out Gibbons and took over the magazine, and she decided that she had enough of the academic world. She'd been teaching at Stanford, and so she came in, took over the business, and managed the business for almost 40 years. And then there's a little story there. We had to find out that we could afford to do the Gazette. And Irene had been taking belly dancing lessons. And the her belly dancing teacher, Fatima, had a magazine. Which was published in Palo Alto. So I took one of the gazettes down and said, would you publish this and how much would you charge? And we found out what they would charge. And I wrote an editorial called Buying the Bullet. And we raised the price from 80 cents to $1.20. And everybody stayed with us. And it worked out. We could financially do it. And this company in Palo Alto had a young graphic artist named Sharon. And after about a year, they went out of business. But Sharon established her own graphic arts company called Just So, for Just Sharon Olson. And we hired her as art director, and she's been with us for almost 50 years and is still producing the Gazette. And Irene, I couldn't have done it without Sharon. I couldn't have done it without Irene, because I was teaching school all the time until I retired. But we ran the Gazette for years before I retired. And I retired at age 60 because I wanted to work full-time on the business, which was, at that time, starting to make money and was a good retirement income. So that's the story.
That's fantastic. I've never heard that story before. I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Yeah.
Where do you think the print media is going today? I mean, when you started, it was a different world than it is today with the print media. Where is it headed?
Well, we charged 80 cents for the first Gazette. Ours was $1.20. It's now $8.99, and I think it's going to go up. The problem with the print media, too, one, people are turning to the digital images, the digital world, the younger people are. And secondly, it costs too much money to move these things around. It usually costs us $1 to send one copy overseas. It's too expensive to mail it. And I think that's going to kill the magazines. And I'm not a digital person. So I think we're going to see more digital, more of what we're doing right now, and less print as the future goes on. It's just too expensive. And all the magazines are losing readership, all of them. Model Railroader, Railroad Model Craftsman, Gazette, they're all losing readership very slowly.
Is it people dropping out of the hobby, or where are they going?
I think they're going digital. We have more and more digital talk, Zooms and chat rooms, and you can find anything on the internet.
Yeah.
I can look at the most obscure item on the internet and find it. I don't have to go back to a Gazette or a Model Railroader.
And I don't know what your answer would be, but I've talked to other editors, and they all seem to have the same problem. And that is they can't get authors. They can't get people that want to take the time to write the article.
Yeah. Now I do not have that trouble. I'm fortunate. I've got a lot of people that want to be in the magazine, but White River now has a digital Gazette, and so they're moving in that direction. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think people are dropping the hobby. I think they're moving digitally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a very, very vital manufacturing base. I mean, all these diesels coming in.
Yeah.
And they're like $300 and $400, and they're selling them.
And I talked to Shane Wilson last night, who owns Scale Trains. And Shane was telling me, he and his wife have been traveling around the country going to different clubs. And he said he's amazed at how many young people he's seeing at the clubs now compared to a few years ago. He thinks that young people are coming into the hobby.
Yeah. I think the technology may be attracting them.
I think that's great. Whatever the attraction is, I think it's wonderful for the hobby that they want to participate.
I agree. One of the biggest criticisms of the NMRA exhibit we did in Sacramento is there's not enough modern image.
Yeah.
You know, and young people have this modern image of railroads, which I really don't have.
Of course, let's face it, the stuff that you put in that exhibit, the modelers that built the stuff that's out there, they weren't building the modern stuff. They were building what you got in the exhibit. So that was model railroading at that point in time.
Yeah, I have no problem filling the Gazette, 100 pages an issue, with non-modern image. I don't have any modern image. It's all old time or old narrow gauge. And so there's a body of people out there who are fascinated by the history of the hobby, the history of railroads.
No question about it. Bob, you got to have 1,000, if not more, stories of being the editor of the Gazette. Can you share a couple of those with us? I mean, you know, you've told us how you started it, but there's got to be a lot of different stories along the way.
I thought about it when Harry Brunk, who wrote a series for me, which we'll talk about later, contacted me. I wanted to see his layout. And so Charlie Getz and I flew to Denver and rented a car because Harry was up in Scruggs Junction, Wyoming someplace. We drove up there, and he was a ranch hand on a big ranch. And his layout had been built in a disused bunkhouse. And we went in to see the layout, and it ran all through the bunkhouse. It ran across the toilet, it ran over the bathtub, it ran through the wall, it ran around the refrigerator, it ran across the stove, it ran all over. I was surprised at how it was intertwined into that bunkhouse. And he had about a 12 by 18 inch piece of masonite on the edge of the layout, which is where he did his model building. Now, I'll never forget that layout wound in and around that bunkhouse and that little modeling space where he just pushed his swarf away and continued model building. But that's one story I remember.
I'll be darned. That had to be something.
And another one was we had an antiquarian bookstore in Los Altos. And on the wall was a framed painting. And that painting had been the first cover of the Gazette. Now I had nothing to do with choosing it. Gibbons had chosen it. And for years it was there, and I wanted to buy it because I wanted to have it in our office. And so one day Irene went in and said, "Would you sell me that painting?" And the guy said, "I would only sell it to Bob Brown." And she said, "What about selling it to Bob Brown's wife?" And he sold it to her, and it's now hanging in our office with a copy of the first cover.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, listen, over the years, you've published articles by some of the best modelers in the world. No question about it. But there's got to be in your mind one or two, maybe more, that I won't say are better than anybody else, but maybe just stick in your mind that when you think of the Gazette and think of the different authors, so-and-so's name comes into your mind for whatever reason. Can you talk about that? Do you have anybody?
I remember Dick Andrews. Dick Andrews wrote a column for Railroad Model Craftsman called The Narrow-Gauge Junction. And it was full of lore and it was wonderful. And when the Gazette came out, he wanted to shift, and he came over to me and write for me, but he decided to call it the Extra Narrow Gauge Junction because he didn't want to confuse it. And while he was not a top modeler, he was full of stories and lore. And so we finally took all of his columns and put them together into a book called The Extra Narrow Gauge Junction. But I remember he was dying, and his daughter told me he was in his deathbed in the hospital writing his last column for me to publish. So I published it, of course. And of course, Cliff Grant, he was a giant, and he was a mentor to me. He took me under his wing. When I had to build those 0-2 fornies, he made tools for me. He showed me how to do it. He didn't do it for me. He made me do it. But Cliff was a wonderful, wonderful mentor, and he was gruff, and he would scold me for working too fast. You work too fast, and I remember getting some of Grantline's parts, and he had a monthly meeting at his house, and I took his parts for a 3000 series boxcar, took it home, spent the intervening month building a boxcar, and Cliff was known for wearing an eye loop on his glasses, a jeweler's eye loop. And so I walked into the master and I showed him my boxcar, and he took it in his hands and he sat down and he flipped. He was known for flipping his loop over, and he went all over that boxcar for about 10 minutes. He handed it back and said, "Neat work," and flipped his eyelid up. I remember that. And I'll talk about Bill Coffey shortly. And of course, Lee Kloss, who established the quarter-inch AAR standards. And Al Armitage wrote for me for over 120 articles. And of course, Harry Brunk. And Mallory Hope Farrell, who wrote for hundreds of articles on a prototype. And Brooks Snover, who still writes for me and models an S scale. He's modeled the Buffalo Creek and Gauley Railroad in S scale. And, a newcomer, if you will, he's written over 50 articles already. Craig Symington, who's taken over from Jim Vail. I asked Jim years ago to write a column on getting them running. Write about what you have to do to get a model railroad to work. And Craig is kind of taking that over now. And he writes on the practical problems of getting a model railroad to run. But there are so many I could mention. And these are some that have rang a bell in my mind.
Let me ask you this. Did John Allen ever write an article for the Gazette?
He died before the Gazette was published.
Okay.
The Gazette started in 75. He died in 73. But he subscribed to Fine Lines. I knew that.
Yeah.
And I think he would have written for me if he had lived. I met him once or twice. He came to my house once for an open house. He was a heavy man. In fact, he died from this weight on his heart. And he sat down on my workbench and broke it. That's my big story about John Allen. I have all of his narrow gauge stuff in my collection, but it's all burned.
Well, at least you have it, though. That's better.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you finally ended up selling the Gazette to White River.
Yeah.
You stayed the editor. Do you have any regrets of selling it?
None. When we got into our 80s, Irene and I talked about this, and if something happened to me, she would not be able to carry it on. And if something happened to her, I could probably get a business manager, but I wouldn't want to, because we were a partnership for 40 years.
Right.
And sure enough, she suffered a stroke 3 years after we sold, but the magazine was being administered by White River. So I was able to continue it on without her. And to this day, that happens. And White River decided to continue to employ Sharon. And so Sharon is still producing the artwork of the magazine, making it beautiful. And they only agreed to hire her for 1 year, but she's so good that 3 years later, in fact, it's more than 6 years now, 6 years later, she's still being paid to produce the magazine. And she's a wonder. So she makes it beautiful. So no, I have no regrets. We sold in 2016. Irene died in 2019. So it was a good move.
Yeah.
And they've been wonderful. They've left me alone. They allowed me to do what I want to do. Sharon and I are a good team. Kevin Udaley, the publisher, said a few weeks ago, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Don't fix it. Yeah. Well, one of the series articles in the series that I used to open the magazine for first before I read anything else was Harry Burke's articles of Up Clear Creek. How did you find Harry?
Well, he came to me, but he I met he had a column in the Slim Gauge News, and he wrote it with a fellow named Bill Sheldrick, and they wrote under the pseudonym of Leighton Slow. And
That was a newspaper, right?
no, that was a magazine. That was the Slim Gauge News. But
Okay.
Harry wanted to come back into the Gazette, but Sheldrick did not. So that's when Harry decided to do his column. So he came to me. I really didn't go to him. And then after Harry dropped Leighton Slow, it was called the Narrow-Gauge Scene, Charlie Getz took it over. And he was in the first issue, and he's been in every single issue except the second one in his for almost 60 years now. He's has a long tenure for Charlie to do that column. So
Yeah.
that's how I got Harry. I didn't ask him. In fact, I asked Jim Vale to write a column, but other than that, it's always been people coming to me. I mean, I'm running a column now, a series now on the white locomotives of the White Pass and Yukon by Rob Bell. He came to me. So I'm fortunate. People want to write in the Gazette, knock on wood. I hope that keeps up.
Think you'll ever find another Harry?
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm looking for one. I've got 5 columns now, and that's enough.
Okay.
They're good, but they take up a lot of room.
Well, I know that you're a great supporter of the NMRA, and you spent a tremendous amount of time and effort getting the exhibit established in the California Museum. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe some of the hurdles that you had to go through to get that accomplished? Because that's a tremendous accomplishment, Bob.
Well, thank you. We're very pleased with it. You have to go back about 15, 20 years. A man named Dr. Sheldrick, Sefton, Dr. Sefton, died and left his collection of toy trains to the museum, plus about $2 million to make a display. And they made a display called The Magic of Toy Trains. And it's all Lionel and toy trains. This is what people think of when they think of model railroading. Uncle Fred in the basement running his Lionel trains. So Charlie Getz was an attorney general for the state at that time, and he was the lawyer for the museum. And so he asked them, how about putting up a display called The Magic of Scale Model Railroading, which seemed like a good idea. So the NORA developed a committee to build a museum. And we were to do a museum, but unfortunately, space for that didn't happen. So we worked with the museum for 10, 12, 13 years, and they wouldn't sign a contract with us. And finally, they got a new director, and he finally decided to sign the contract. And so Charlie and I, being out here, took the bull by the horns and I worked up a design, and we went to a designer and we signed a contract and with a fabricator, and the designer took my outline and developed it into a design. And it took us about 2 years of working with the designers to get it in place. And the museum committee really helped us by doing the legal work and collecting the money, because there's over $1 million in that exhibit. And so it takes a dedicated committee, and incidentally, no membership dues went into that exhibit. It was all donated money, and it still is. So, you know, you have to get people moving, and I think having a small point group like Charlie and me got it underway. And it takes a small group, but with a big group behind you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. No question.
Too big a group wouldn't get it done. Yeah.
I think we have a photo or something to show this.
Yeah. This is a exhibit. I push the idea of the importance of magazines and books in the hobby. Without magazines and books, we have no way of exchanging information. So
Right.
this came from my collection. There's 80 magazine covers on this display, out of print magazines, and the magazines in the box in the center are still in print. So you can still get them downstairs in the museum store. Some of the books go back to 1906. So
Yeah.
this is one exhibit showing the importance of print media. Frankly, now that you mention it, we don't show the importance of digital media. This is a timeline that we developed, and it's artifact driven. In other words, if we say the model railroader was founded in 1934, we have the model railroader there. And there's a sample of everything we talk about. It's over 40 feet long. And a lot of it came from my collection. Now, on the far left of it, at the beginning, there was a magazine in England that was shipped over by boat to the United States. And in 1912, it went down on the Titanic.
Yeah.
And so the editor had to say, my apologies to American readers, but your May issue went down on the Titanic. And if you notice, there's that red magazine. That's the magazine with the editorial. Notice the newspaper description of the sinking of the Titanic. Notice the model of the Titanic. So we have illustrations in hard copy, in artifacts showing the hobby. Also, notice the open book. The first mention I found of model trains was in a poem by Tennyson called The Princess. In there, he mentions a petty little train puffing around the park. And there is a copy of The Princess opened up to that page showing that quote. So it's a very detailed timeline showing the hobby and how it progressed.
Fantastic. Well, let me break this a minute because we've got a question from somebody that's watching the show.
I'll be darned.
And they said, ask Bob if he has done any ON30 modeling.
Am I doing any ON30 modeling? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you
I don't show it in my pictures, but I have an entire lime kiln scene in ON30, and I have an ON30 line running up to my hotel, but I don't have any pictures of it. But yes, I'm strongly working in ON30.
I've heard this from other people. I appreciate getting your reaction. I've heard that of all the narrow gauge scales, ON30 may be the most popular.
Yes. What happened is Lee Riley, the late Lee Riley of Bachmann, came out with ON30. And they produced, it's been my experience that the scale engaged with the most manufacturer support becomes the most popular.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee started bringing out locomotives like 1 or 2 a year for like 10 years. There must be 12 or 13 locomotives. Plus he brought all freight cars, all cabooses, and all passenger cars. You can get anything in ON30, and it runs on HO track. But but it's not available anymore. You've got to go to the used market. But that single point caused it to become more popular. Now people are not modeling ON2, they're modeling ON30. They're modeling ON2 in ON30. That's naughty. Or they're modeling Chama in ON30, but Chama was in ON3. Or the people modeling RGS, which was 3 foot in ON30. So it's really taken over, which is great. And some wonderful layouts have been built.
Since Bachmann is not doing what they used to be doing as much, where do you see it? Do you see ON30 still growing, or what's going to happen to it?
I don't know, as long as it's on the used market. Right now, you cannot buy an ON3 locomotive, new. you could not buy an HON3 locomotive new. I don't think there's an SM3 locomotive new. So you have to turn to the used market now for ON30, but they've got so many available that I think they're still available. The only thing Bachmann maintains is their trolley car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, being a trolley guy, that's important to me.
ON30 was developed for people who made these porcelain villages at Christmas.
Yep.
And they wanted a train to run through it. And they didn't want to make a special track, so they made it ON30 because they already had HO track.
That's right.
And that's why ON30 developed.
Well, listen, I mentioned a few minutes ago, you have obtained the NMRA's Master Model Railroad designation. And congratulations on doing that. But for a long time, as John Allen never wanted it, you never really wanted it either.
No, John Allen would not be the first one because he didn't believe in putting himself forth for awards. So
right.
John Allen wants it, Bob Brown wants it that way. But I was approached in 1993 to try for it because they wanted to give it at a PCR convention. So Jim and Bale and I decided to try for it. But I wouldn't do it if I had to do anything special, because John Allen wouldn't do it. But I had enough contest models behind me that I could qualify without doing anything special. So that's how I got into it. But then I wrote an editorial, I'm wrong, because I support the program now. It gets people model building, and it's a good program. And I have some friends who could, if they did it, they'd build a lot more models. And so I'm for it. But it's not like putting yourself forth. It's like earning a merit badge in the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
It's the same. Yeah.
I personally think it's the greatest model education you can possibly get. I don't know of another hobby that has that kind of education component connected with it.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you're a model railroader and you really want to learn about railroading, real railroading, model railroading, and be a part of the hobby, that's the way to go, in my opinion. Now, people say, well, I don't like the inter contest and all of that, but that's a different question. But as far as what you'll learn by participating in that program, I don't think you'll get a better education anywhere in the world.
You're dead right. And in fact, many regions took my editorial and published it in their bulletins.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's quite a ways back, but yeah.
Bob, do you have any advice or tips that you can share about how to accomplish a big project like your museum? We're trying to do something that's never been done before in the hobby, and that's for a group of volunteers to try to create a scholarship program for young model railroaders to help them in their education. And we're going through all the things that you go through trying to start something new. But do you have any tips or have any advice for doing something like that? Because you've been through, not only creating a very successful magazine, but you got the museum started for the NMRA.
Yeah. Well, of course, I had nothing to do with fundraising for that museum. And of course, the Gazette was done most of the time as a hobby. It always paid for itself.
Right.
But it started to make money after a while. But I don't know what to say. I had not heard of your foundation. Okay. And I know you can't push it too much, and you get till you get your 501.
And we just got that.
Good. Now I'm telling you the obvious. Get the word out to the magazines. Get the word out to the digital world, and go to Cindy, who helped me get on the Zoom. Cindy has a foundation in Yucatan, Mexico, for Mayan children, and she's going out to the Rotary Club, to the Elks. She's going away from, of course, she doesn't have model railroads, but get away from the model railroads. There's a lot of groups out there that want to give money for a tax write-off. And so think of going to the Rotaries, going to the Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts will be good for you because you're helping youth.
Right.
And think of that. That's all I can think of to I just don't know. I did not involve myself in fundraising. I stayed out of it. Yeah.
You will immediately get something from me to put in your magazine.
Yeah, get me something I can put in my magazine.
You got it. Thank you.
If it's a news brief, it won't cost you anything. An ad will cost you money. That's why, not me.
But let's get back to some of your personal modeling and
Sure.
your collecting and so forth, and talk about that for a while. I think we've got a lot of different pictures here of your modeling that I'd like to go through.
Okay, I appreciate it. I look forward to it.
Okay.
Okay,
There you
wow. This is, I call this shoehorn because it's a layout. In fact, it's 0-30 on the right side. You can see the Bachmann diesel, and it's shoehorned over the stairway up to my layout room in an alcove, and that's 1/4-inch AAR standard gauge in the foreground. The boat is a innovative hobbies kit. Took me 4 months to put it together for review, and the smaller boat is a lesser complicated model. But this is a waterfront scene I did.
That's gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
That's
Next.
me.
Yep.
Oh,
There you go.
this is the end of my layout showing my sawmill based on the Michigan, California Pino Grand Mill. And there's nothing more to say about it. It's all dusty. Excuse me.
You're kind of like me. You like to build it. You don't like to maintain it.
I don't like to dust. It's hard to dust them down. Okay, here's another scene showing a typical train on my layout. The track's all hand laid, and that's a PSC Heisler, West Side Heisler. My town in the background, my workshops in the far background. I'm fortunate in having my workshop right next to my layout, so I don't have to run up and down stairs to get a tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What size rail do you use, Bob, when you went on
This was code 100, but on the other side of the layout is code 70.
I got you. Next.
All handling. This is a rail bus I scratch built. This is my dependable runner for open houses because it won't derail. And I took a lifelike diesel, I think, and HO diesel and widened it out to 0-3. It runs like a watch. It's got a DCC sound system, and I'm very happy with it. Been running for 30 years.
Oh, gosh. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah. Next.
Here's a detailed scene. I don't know what to say about it. This is a kind of vignette I like to do. Got people in the woodland scenic figures. Got a barbecue. Got a. I called that wagon a gypsy wagon. Got scolded for it. It's not a gypsy wagon. I can't remember now what. It's a certain ethnic group, which I've forgotten now. I'm sorry. But I got scolded for calling it a gypsy wagon.
But those kind of vignettes are extremely important because a lot of young modelers, they don't have space maybe right now for a full railroad, but they can build scenes like this and use them later on a model railroad and have the enjoyment of learning how to build as they go along.
Yeah, I love making these little scenes. I've got them all over my layout.
Yeah. Next.
Here's another one. Notice the sheep coming in on the right, and I've just gotten a sound unit I'm going to install of ba sheep, and the little truck. When I was a kid in Modesto, we had a lot of migrants coming through from the Dust Bowl, and they were unfortunately called Okies because they were a lot of them from Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
That was a derogative term, but they had these trucks full of stuff. Think of I've got a senior moment now. I said I was 90. The Grapes of Wrath movie, and so I wanted to make one of these little Model Ts full of furniture, and that's what I did here.
That's clever. That is really clever.
And here's a 4-wheel caboose with disconnected log trucks. And
Yep.
this is my code 70 track on the other side of the layout.
Yep. Yep.
Here's a scene. I don't know what's going on with those chess players, but it's just another detailed scene. Looks like they're mad at each other. There's my red light district on the right.
Yep.
Here's an interior of a factory repair facility.
That's just
Problem with
beautiful.
this is it's near the edge. I keep bumping it. Here's another interior. I'm very proud of this interior. I spent a lot of time on this one. You notice it's
Yeah.
right on the edge of the layout. And notice I don't have any wall, so people can look in. I don't have walls on a lot of my interior buildings. In fact, Lee Gustus on the Great Western Models sent me a stamp mill, and he did not send a roof. He said, because you won't put it on. So I become known for not wanting to show off my interiors.
Nick? That may be all the photos we've got.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, here's a little 4-wheel caboose. I won the Brass Lantern Award at the London National Convention with this little caboose. It's got a full interior, individually planked walls. Very pleased with it. Still runs on my layout.
It's
Got a
beautiful.
full interior. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Here's a more close-up. That's a horseshoe pitch.
Yeah.
People in the near foreground shooting. Got a shooting party. That's really dusty. I need to get in there, dust it off.
I like the fallen tree.
Yeah. Here's some photographers lined up waiting for a train to come by. I don't know what that bull's going to do.
You know, the scenes that you create are really, they really make your layout come alive, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's what I like to notice the skunk behind the photographer in the
Yeah.
photo. Little things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Here's someone chasing a pig and lifting the tie. The simple detail, all commercial.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
But it's the thought, because a lot of people don't think about putting these kind of things on the model railroad.
Here's one that's kind of gruesome. Notice the feet sticking out under the steamroller. And notice the photographer taking a picture for the newspaper. Now, there's a little story here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Here's somebody using the loo.
You make your own trees?
Yes and no. A lot of them are given to me. This is a new one of my latest vignettes. It's a little yard selling gravel. But
Absolutely beautiful.
this is
Oh,
a China without a focus. This is a Chinatown.
Yeah.
Charlie gets his wife is Chinese. So when I made my Chinatown, I asked her to make the signs, and she made the signs for me. They say things like squash, and I don't know what they say. Now here's one a recent one. These convicts have been digging. I don't know whether they're burying the skeleton or unburying it. I don't know. There's a new company called Mini Prints, and they make skeletons in quartering scale.
Did you paint the convicts?
Yes. Here's a commercial gas station with details.
Absolutely.
Got a hearse. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me.
I tell you, your modeling is just unbelievable. It really is. It's just a pleasure to be able to see it and hear you talk about it.
Yeah. I'm pleased to have you put that out.
How did you get started collecting models? Not building them, but just collecting them.
Well, I was very influenced by articles like Jack Alexander's articles. And one of the pioneers was Hugh G. Boutell. He was writing articles in the 1920s on Narrow-Gauge for British magazines. And I had seen his articles in back issues, and while they're not good modeling, he captured the charm of narrow gauge, especially 2-foot.
Right.
So for about 15 years, I knew he sold his models or given them to someone up the street where he lived. And I put messages in the Gazette. Does anybody know where these are? And finally someone said, yeah, the guy up the street owns them. And he's up in Montana. So the guy sent me the fellow's phone address, and I wrote him, and he said, you come up and get them, you can have them. So Irene and I jumped in our van, drove up to God knows where, and picked them up and drove back. And that's how I started, because I got, here's a model that was written up in 1945 in the MR, and you can look at it, it's all handmade, but it's scratch built, and I value that in model building. If you look carefully, there's a lever roughly under the PCVRR. That is Pinecone Valley. That lever can be thrown to disconnect the trucks so you can roll the engine back and forth. You can't roll the locomotive easily, it's in gear. But he designed that. Look at those trucks. And he has a incense burner in the smokestack, so it burns piney woods incense. It makes it smell like the piney woods of Maine. This thing, it's to me folk art. And the engineer has real cloth clothes sewn by Hugh's wife.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
I agree with that. You know, part of what I'm finding, and the more people I talk to, the more obvious it becomes to me. There are parts of model railroading that are really art.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
should be considered art.
Yeah. I agree.
And for sure, this, you know, you look at this and you hear about it. I mean, whoever puts incense in a smokestack? I mean, how many people have you ever heard in model railroading that do that?
This is folk art. Now, I had a friend who was a fine scale modeler. He looked at it. He said, you went all the way to Montana for this junk. I remember him saying that. It's just a matter of perception. This turns me on wanting to model.
Absolutely. And to think that somebody actually scratch built that. That's not a kit. That's not something that you just bought and put together with somebody else's instructions. Somebody created that.
And by 1940, he was running them on live steam, believe it or not.
Jeez.
I haven't found a live steamer, but he had them on live steam. I don't know what happened to him. Yeah.
Yeah, well. All right, so I got another question here before we move on.
Okay.
Any comments or any guidelines? I see more at, well, if I could get this to be larger print, I could probably read it. I see more at train shows. I know Mary Miller was the first female MMR number 175, and her husband also was MMR 165.
Correct.
Are there any more lady MMRs?
I think there are a couple of more.
And there are, yes.
Yeah.
I
And-
can't tell you who they are, and I can't tell you what their numbers are, but yes, there are.
And there's a new special interest group on women in the hobby. And the editor, the editor, Cynthia Priest, the editor of the NMRA magazine, is working towards her MMR, and her son and her husband are MMRs. So she'll be the first full family.
And there is a husband and wife that are Lionel operators.
Okay.
He just got his MMR,
Okay.
and he is months away, I think, from getting her MMR.
Good. So to answer your question, yes, there are more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Now, getting back to where we were, if I can find that.
Hotel.
Okay, we were talking about collecting models.
Yeah.
And we saw that one model that we both agree is true art. I think we have some other pictures in there that we can see too.
Yeah, see them. Yeah, here's two more. Well, one, you notice the top one, number 5, looks like it's outside frame. And the bottom one is a little thorny. It's inside, no, well, maybe it's outside frame. But that little model captures the feeling of a forney.
Yeah.
And the only commercial parts on these models are the couplers. He even turned his own wheels. And I've been told he had a steam-driven lathe to do that.
Who built these?
Yeah.
Who built these?
Boutel. Yeah, I'm sorry. These are Hugh Boutel.
I got you. Okay.
Pinecone Valley. I've got almost all of his models, including his backdrops. I could recreate his railroad if I had room.
Oh, that's just beautiful work.
Yeah.
It really is. Unbelievable.
Fun.
Here's some others.
Now these belong to pioneer Jack Alexander. And the bottom green one is by Vince Ryan. Now, Vince Ryan was a friend of Jack's, and Jack died about 1958. He'd written a number of articles in the 40s for MR.
Yeah.
And so Vince got Jack's models. Then Vince died, and I had seen Jack's models at Vince's house. So Vince's wife gave Jack's models and Vince's models to a fellow in Illinois. And the fellow in Illinois put them on for sale. And I was told about them, and I bought them all. That's how I got them. So I got all of Vince's models, most of them, and most of Jack's. Now, the top model, the 440, is one of 3 that he built. And he belonged to a group of people called the Narrow-Gauge Guild. And they would like I would build 3 boxcars and trade 2 of them to 2 other people, and they would send me their cars, and I would send them mine, and that's how you build up your roster. Yeah. But I have a cigar box full of parts to build 2 more of these 440s that Jack started and never finished. And the bottom, the 267, in those days, you could buy a 00 gauge 280. That's 4mm scale. The American 00 gauge is the same as ON3. Oh. And so the modelers would buy these 00 gauge 280s and put new superstructures on them, and that's how they got their mechanisms. They also had a 10-wheeler, but I have numerous. It was called, I can't remember now. Anyway, the company manufactured these 00 gauge locomotives, and the ON3ers used the mechanisms.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is more of Hugh Boutel's. Notice the dairy car, Pinecone Valley, the dump car. He had a nice eye.
Yeah, he did.
This is a Jack Alexander rail bus built on an HO mechanism that has been widened out. Timber Ridge Logging Company. Jack, I didn't take a picture of it. Jack had a motor car with a wind-up mechanism. And so during an operating session, he would wind that up and surreptitiously put it on the track and let it go. And it would run around right in the middle of the operation session and cause havoc.
You know, you mentioned a minute ago that the modeler had a great eye.
Oh, yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they just have the eye. They could put together a model that looked right. I mean, looks like a goose. It's not a goose. It looks like a goose. But
Yeah.
he has the right elements to be a goose. And there are some people, I don't know, most scratch builders have the eye.
Yeah.
What I have found in the early days, the models just came out of the end of my fingers. The weathering, everything was great. And when that doesn't happen, I put the model away and stop because it's not coming out right. I don't know what this is. It may be part of that inspiration or imagination. I don't know.
I know what you mean, though. I mean, you can almost feel whether it's right or not.
Feel it. And here's some more. It was Nason. Nason was the company that 280 is the Nason. And one down below is a Mogul. But these are more Jack Works models. I've also felt sometimes people are a little, I use the term heavy-handed in their modeling.
Yeah.
It's not subtle. And that's part of imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost the way you see what the real locomotive was, and somehow between seeing it and your memory of it and then trying to create it as a model, it either comes together or it doesn't.
It doesn't. You throw it away. It doesn't. It doesn't work. It doesn't not work out. Yeah.
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 And if it seems like it's falling together, you just keep going because you know at the end of the day it's going to come out exactly as you hoped it would.
Exactly.
I don't know how to explain that
feeling. It's a feeling you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't.
And you can you're right. It comes off the end of your finger. You can feel, if you're building it right, it looks right to you. It just, you don't have to worry about it. You know that it's going to come out okay.
Yeah, and you push back from your table, and you're satisfied.
And you say, it's finished. I have finished that model.
That's right. That's right.
Time to move on. Okay. Who were the people who most influenced your modeling?
Okay. Lee Kloss, who I mentioned, Cliff Grant, John Allen, and one day Lee Kloss said, "There's a fellow up over here working in 013. Would you like to meet him?" And I said, "Sure." So I went over and I met Bill Coffey. And Bill was doing models that were so beautiful that I came home and threw everything I had away and started over. And Bill was doing Cerebin castings. And I was so enthralled by these that he gave me a baggie full of castings. And I came home and I built a logging bunk shed and full of his castings and took them back and showed them to him. He was wonderful. He unfortunately went out of the hobby, but he told me how to cast parts. He taught me how to cut wood. He taught me how to weather. He was wonderful. He was my inspiration. He was a crusty little guy. And here's the engine shed that turned me on. Notice the little engine he scratch built. Those were built in 1968. Individual shingles. He made his own windows. He had a full interior. I couldn't believe this. I wanted to do it. Notice I have a little sign down there. He gave me all of his models. And unfortunately, he died a few years ago. But he's the seminal person that got me really doing what I do now, or what I've done for the last 10 years, 20, 30 years.
People that will be interviewed, no telling how many years from now, are the people that you've done the same thing to,
I hope.
that will take the knowledge that you've passed on, because you've learned from some of the real masters of the time.
A
And,
couple of your interviewees mentioned me and Lee Kloss and Bill Coffey. I noticed it. Yeah.
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 And
So,
it's funny, but it just passes on from one generation to the next, as long as that mentoring process carries on. I think our hobby is in good shape.
I think
What worries me is that a lot of the modeling done today, a lot of people aren't modeling today like we used to in the past.
you're right.
And that worries me, because that could be the break in trying to continue the great modeling that I believe has made the hobby how great it is today.
You're right. Boutel, Alexander,
Yep.
Vince Ryan, Bill Coffey, Cliff Grant, Al Armitage, moves on. But now you don't get the same thing with a diesel you've taken out of a box, put on some Pico track, and taken cars that you've taken out of a box. It's not the same. It's you operate them. It's a different hobby. It's a hobby. You do what you enjoy. If that's what you enjoy, that's what you enjoy.
But the modeling part of it, that's what I enjoy. That's my concern.
Exactly.
And trying to get to continue. So
We're on the same track there. You're right. That's what I hope to keep going in the Gazette. I think the Gazette shows that aspect of the hobby.
And that's why I'm doing these shows. That's why I write the articles that I do. Okay.
Yeah.
We're on the same page. All right. So what are your general thoughts about the state of the hobby today? We've talked about it a little bit there, but where's the hobby going? I mean, is it going toward take it out of the box, put it on a piece of track, on a piece of plywood, and turn the power on?
I think it may be. I think there's going to be an element like you and I have been talking about. But how big that is and can that support? I mean, to do what we're talking about takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of parts, some machining, some experience in tool soldering and machine work. And if people aren't doing this, it's going to fall out. And when I read the magazines, the mainline magazines, I get mainstream, I should say. I see all these $500 diesels that are beautiful, are absolutely beautiful. I see these $50 to $100 cars, beautiful, but you do nothing towards them.
Yeah.
So I worry like you do, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. It may come back, and maybe people want to build things. Maybe it'll get too expensive. But I see technology improving. I see the detail improving, but that detail is going to cost, and so is the technology. It's going to cost money, and I don't know. I can see battery on board, dead rail, but these new kids, they know this computer stuff so beautifully. You know, I'm amazed at what they can do. So
I am too, and I think 3D. The 3D printing and so forth, I think in the future could be a major part of modeling. Not the kind of modeling that I do, but certainly a major part of modeling.
Yes.
But without modeling in the hobby,
yeah,
what you're going to lose, in my opinion, is that thrill of being able to build something, sit back, look at it, and say, I built that.
That's right. Now you have that drive, you're going to do it. If you don't have that drive, you're not. Where the drive comes from, I don't know.
And how you try to instill that drive in somebody, I don't know that either. But
I'm going to try doing it through the Gazette.
Absolutely.
By showing the best I can find.
That's what I'm trying to do.
I'm sure you are, yeah.
So, Bob, you look at a model you built, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I think you and I agree. When you build something and you sit back in your chair and you look at it, how do you know it's finished?
If there's nothing more I can think of to put on it, I think I know it's finished. There's always that niggling little feeling. maybe I should have put that nut and bolt there. Maybe I should have had that. If I don't have that feeling, I know it's done. But if I have that nagging feeling, here's a scene. We decided to use this. I don't know what to say about this, but this scene is done to me. Sometimes I need, like, I come along and I say, I need something in another scene. So look at that tractor. I'll take that tractor out and put it in the new scene, but then that ruins this scene. So each element in the scene has to be here. The two women on the right look like they're arguing to me. The man in the middle, it looks like he's appalled at what they're saying. It's just the scene. I don't know what to say about it. It's just right. There's nothing more to add, and I can't take anything out of it. And so I'm finished with it.
Bob, is that a piece of art? Do you consider that kind of model a piece of art?
Well, I since you asked me that, you're preparatory to this, I've looked up art, and art has all the definitions include creativity, imagination, and skill in art. That, I think, is art. Yes, with that as a definition.
Why don't we talk about our models as art more in our hobby?
Well, it may sound too, I don't know, hoity-toity. I don't know. I don't. Maybe, for years I haven't, and I don't. It sounds, I wanted to change fine lines because it was fine scale and it was too hoity-toity.
Yeah.
Me, and I think people look back and say, well, you're fine scale, or they look back and say, oh, you think model railroads an art. My Uncle Fred in the basement is not doing art. You're crazy. You're making it into something it's not. It's a hobby. We play with toy trains. It's a hobby, but we love making them. We love it. And I don't know why. I have people that come up and see my layout. They're enthralled by it. They love to look at the man going to the bathroom in the privy. They love it. But I don't think they think I'm cuckoo, but I think some people think if you're a master model railroader, if you're think it's art, you're cuckoo. I don't care. It's what I do to enjoy myself.
Absolutely. What modeling advice would you give to a modeler that comes in the hobby and is building his first model?
Well, we have a big display in the exhibit on this. And the first thing it says is Google scale model railroading. First thing. Then you go to your hobby shop and buy some magazines, read, look, and then look on the internet and look at YouTube's, look at this stuff, and immerse yourself in it. And then you need a workbench. We have a workbench in our display. Then you need to decide on what scale, and we have all the scales. Then you need to decide what kind of a railroad, logging, trolley, mainline, modern image, and then we take them through. But until you learn something about the hobby, you're not going to be able to go anywhere. You're going to get somewhere along the line that bug is going to bite you or it's not going to bite you. And if it doesn't bite you, you're going to start crocheting or canoeing or something. If it bites you, it's a lifetime hobby and you'll love it. So I say immerse yourself, learn. When I got that first model railroader in 1944, I knew nothing. And then Kalmbach came out right after the war with a 10-cent booklet, which I got. I read that. And then I read everything I could get my hands on, and I learned, and I learned, and I learned. And then I got in with some knowledgeable people like Cliff and Lee and Bill and Al, and I learned. It's all you can do. You've got to learn. And
you knew a lot of these people.
Yeah.
If they were alive today, how would they look at our hobby, do you think?
Well, I think like you and I are. I think they would. I don't know. I can imagine Cliff flipping his eye loop down. I don't think he'd look at a modern image diesel. I don't know. I don't know what to say there. Uh, they were all builders, but they had to be. You couldn't buy it. I
Right.
had to build those ON240s because nobody produced one. Yeah. So,
But if you could today buy all of this stuff, would you
well,
still build it? I think I would still want to build it.
yeah, I think you're right. I like the ON30 because I can buy it and it runs. I don't
Yeah,
have that Barney dockside problem.
right.
It comes with DCC and they run, they're beautiful runners. It's nice, but I'm 90 years old. I paid
Yeah.
my dues over the years. Yeah. I guess I have new people that come in and build models that are amazing. There are people out there doing it. And I try
Yeah.
and feature them in the Gazette. There are people doing it.
And more power to them. And
Exactly.
thank you so much for finding them and putting them in the Gazette, because that's the kind of
Yeah.
thing. If you see other people doing it, then maybe you'll try it.
Yeah.
And that,
Try
that's one
different
way.
scale. You get kits in different scales and try them out. Try it out and see. It'll catch you. It'll grab you. If it doesn't grab you, you'll go off and do
Forget.
something else.
Well, listen, we've been talking for a while and covered a lot of different things. So I'll give you the final word here before we end this.
Well,
Any final thoughts?
I can't think of my life without model railroading. And as I've said, the hobby has provided me with great satisfaction. It relieves stress. It's allowed me to make many friends. I found a magazine and maybe live to be 90. But none of it, this could not have happened without the support of my late wife over a 64-year period. If you don't have a good spouse, it's not going to happen. You can't. I have a friend whose wife won't allow him to have his layout in the house. So he has to rent a place outside to have his layout. It won't work if your spouse is not with you. And I notice you have Mrs. Sassi as one of your interviewees.
Yes.
Yeah. So Lou has a good wife there to help him. But I couldn't have done it without. She gave up an academic career at Stanford to do my magazine. And I'll never forget that. And the magazine would not have happened without Irene, without our art director, Sharon Olson, my authors, my advertisers, my columnists, my readers. I didn't do it by myself, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful trip. And I really appreciate you allowing me to share it with your viewers. Thank you.
Well, Bob, I can't thank you enough for being here and joining us tonight. This has been a lot of fun for me. It's been a real honor to be able to spend some time like this with you and hear your stories and just be able to enjoy the history that you have in the hobby, the people that you've known, the models that you've seen, and the kind of knowledge that you possess about the narrow gauge market particularly is just phenomenal. So thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you. Thank you again. I appreciate it. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, well, that's it for this evening, folks. Thank you so much for joining us on YouTube. I hope that you really enjoyed the show tonight. If you did, I hope you'll subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, and ring the bell. That way you'll get notices of all of our future shows. And we have some other great modelers that we've scheduled for interviews in the future. We do this every second Thursday. So we won't have one next week. We'll have one the following week. I'd also hope that you'll go to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe to that. If you do, then you'll get the login links that allow you to join us live on our Zoom shows each Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. We do those every Wednesday. We've been doing those for almost going on 3 years now. Again, we have this scholarship that we're trying desperately to get off the ground, and we're enthusiastic about the future for our scholarship because we've been able to acquire the 501c3 designation for the future events. And we're hoping next year to be able to expand the amount and the size of the scholarships that that we're able to provide the youth that are model railroaders. So if you know of someone that's interested, please advise them that the scholarship is available, and ask them to consider applying. Again, they can get all the information they want on our website at newtracksmodeling.com/scholarship. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed it, and happy modeling to you until next time.